Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Franklin Mountaineer, but everybody just calls me Frank. Been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 16 years now, and before that I was dodging bullets in Korea. Got a Purple Heart to prove it, though I don't talk about that much. What I do talk about is these mountains. They're in my blood, you see. My great-grandfather was Cherokee, and his daddy before him knew every rock and tree in what's now called the Monongahela National Forest. October 1973 was turning out to be one hell of a month. The leaves were showing off like they do every fall, all reds and golds that make tourists drive up from the flatlands with their cameras. But something felt different this year. Wrong, somehow. Even my old bloodhound Rex had been acting strange, whimpering at shadows and refusing to go down certain trails. I should have listened to that dog. The call came in on a Tuesday morning, crackling through the radio like bad news always does. Missing family, the Pattersons from Baltimore. 4 of them, mom, dad, and 2 kids, maybe 10 and 12 years old. Last seen 3 days ago heading into Devil's Backbone Ridge with enough gear for a week-long camping trip. Now, Devil's Backbone ain't a place I'd recommend for family camping. It sits up at 4,200 feet, always wrapped in fog, thick as cotton. The Cherokee had a name for it. Envi Asgaya, which my great-grandfather told me means place of screaming spirits. Most folks don't know about that. They just see the pretty views and the old-growth hemlock trees that have been standing there since before Columbus got lost. I've been up that ridge more times than I can count. Found plenty of lost hikers over the years, usually cold and scared but otherwise fine. This felt different, though. Maybe it was the way the fog hadn't lifted in 4 days, or how the temperature had dropped 20 degrees below normal for October. Maybe it was how my radio kept picking up static that sounded almost like voices speaking words I couldn't quite make out. Or maybe it was what old Joseph Crowfeather told me when I stopped by his place on the way to the trailhead. Joseph's Cherokee, one of the few left around here who remembers the old stories. He was sitting on his porch, whittling a piece of cedar and not looking at me when I pulled up. "You going up to the Backbone, Frank?" he asked, without raising his head. "Missing family," I said. "Gotta find them." Joseph's knife stopped moving. "Might be some places folks ain't meant to be found." "What's that supposed to mean?" He finally looked at me and his dark eyes were serious as a funeral. "Means sometimes the mountain decides to keep what comes to it, especially this time of year." "Come on, Joseph. You know I don't put stock in ghost stories." "Ain't about what you put stock in," he said, going back to his whittling. "It's about what puts stock in you." I left him there on his porch and drove up the winding mountain road to the trailhead. The Pattersons' car was right where the report said it would be. A blue Ford station wagon with Maryland plates, unlocked, keys still hanging in the ignition. That should have been my first real warning sign. Who leaves their car unlocked in the middle of nowhere? I grabbed my gear. Radio, first aid kit, compass, flashlight, and my grandfather's old hunting knife that he'd blessed with Cherokee prayers I'd never learned. Rex was already out of the truck, nose to the ground, but instead of picking up a scent and taking off like he usually did, he just stood there whining. "What is it, boy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. He looked up at me with those brown eyes full of worry, then back at the trail that disappeared into the fog about 30 yards ahead. The air smelled wrong. Not bad, exactly, but empty. Like all the life had been sucked out of it. No bird songs, no squirrel chatter, no buzz of insects. Just silence so complete it made my ears ring. I should have turned around right then. Should have called for backup, or better yet, called the whole thing off until the weather cleared. But I had a job to do, and somewhere up on that ridge were 2 kids who might be cold and hungry and scared. So I checked my radio one more time, nothing but static, and started up the trail with Rex reluctant at my heels. The fog swallowed us after about 50 steps, thick and cold as a wet blanket. My flashlight beam barely cut through it, creating a little bubble of yellow light that moved with us up the winding path. Every now and then, I'd stop and call out, "Hello, Patterson Family Park Service." My voice seemed to get eaten by the mist before it could travel more than a few feet. Rex stayed close, closer than he'd ever stayed before. Usually that dog would range out 20 or 30 yards, following scents and checking every interesting smell. Today, he pressed against my leg like he was afraid to be alone. We'd been hiking for maybe an hour when I noticed the trees. The hemlocks along this part of the trail were old, some of them 400 years or more. I'd seen them in spring when they were green and healthy, full of birds and squirrels. Now they looked sick. Not dying exactly, but wrong. Their needles were still green, but they drooped like they were tired. And the bark looked darker, almost black in places. That's when Rex started growling. It was a low sound, deep in his chest, and his hackles were up like he'd cornered a bear. But I couldn't see anything in the fog except those dark trees pressing in on both sides of the trail. "Easy, boy," I whispered, but my hand went to the knife on my belt without me thinking about it. We kept walking, and with each step, the wrongness got stronger. The temperature seemed to drop another degree. My compass needle was spinning lazy circles instead of pointing north. And somewhere ahead, just at the edge of hearing, I could swear I heard voices. Children's voices, speaking words I couldn't understand. 3 miles up the trail, we found the Pattersons' campsite. Rex found it first, actually. He stopped dead in his tracks and refused to go another step, just stood there, shaking like he'd seen the devil himself. I had to coax him forward with a piece of jerky from my pack, and even then he stayed behind me, whimpering. The camp was set up in a small clearing maybe 50 yards off the main trail. At first glance, it looked normal enough. Blue dome tent, camp chairs arranged around a fire ring, cooler sitting open with food still inside. But something about the whole setup made my skin crawl. Everything was too neat, too arranged. The tent stakes weren't just driven into the ground. They were placed in a perfect pattern that looked almost like a star. The camp chairs faced inward toward the fire ring instead of outward toward the view, and the sleeping bags inside the tent were laid out side by side, zipped up tight like 4 people had been tucked in for the night. But it was the fire ring that really got my attention. Someone had drawn symbols in the cold ashes with their finger, not letters or words I recognized, but shapes that seemed to twist and move when I wasn't looking directly at them. And arranged around the edge of the ring were small stones, each one placed exactly the same distance from the next. "Hello?" I called out, louder this time. "Patterson family, are you here?" Nothing but silence and that damn fog that seemed to press closer every minute. I walked around the camp, looking for signs of where they might have gone. No footprints leading away from the site, which was strange given how soft the ground was from all the moisture. No scattered gear or signs of a quick departure. Even stranger, there was fresh food in the cooler, sandwiches that couldn't have been more than a day old, fruit that hadn't started to brown yet. Rex wouldn't come near the fire ring. Every time I tried to get him to sniff around it, he backed away, and that low growl started up again. Smart dog. I was photographing the ash symbols with my Polaroid camera when I heard it, a child's voice, high and clear, singing something that might have been a lullaby. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, drifting through the fog like smoke. The melody was pretty, almost familiar, but the words weren't English. "Hello?" I called again, turning in a slow circle. "Is someone there?" The singing stopped. In the sudden silence, I could hear my heart beating and Rex panting behind me. Then from somewhere deeper in the forest came an answer. "Help us." It was a man's voice, hoarse and desperate. Had to be Mr. Patterson. "Where are you?" I shouted back. "Keep talking so I can find you." "Help us!" The voice came again, but from a different direction this time. "Please." I grabbed my radio and tried to call for backup, but all I got was static mixed with what sounded like that same child's voice, still singing. The radio crackled and popped, and for just a second I could swear I heard someone speaking Cherokee, the few words I knew from my great-grandfather's stories. Something was very wrong here. Every instinct I'd developed in 16 years of ranger work and 2 years of dodging enemy fire was screaming at me to get out, get help, come back with a full search team and better equipment. But somewhere out there in the fog were 4 people who needed help. 2 of them, just kids. I grabbed a few items from the Pattersons' camp. A sweatshirt that smelled like the mother's perfume. A baseball cap that probably belonged to the boy. Rex would need something with their scent to track them properly. "Come on, boy," I said, holding out the sweatshirt. "Find them." Rex took a tentative sniff, then another. His tail came up slightly, the first positive sign I'd seen from him all day. He put his nose to the ground and started moving. Not with his usual enthusiasm, but at least he was moving. The trail he picked up led away from the clearing and deeper into the forest, toward the limestone caves that honeycomb this part of the mountain. I'd explored some of those caves before, mapped a few of the smaller ones. But there were dozens more that went deeper than anyone had ever measured, some of them connected by underground passages that stretched for miles. As we followed Rex's careful progress through the trees, I started noticing other things that weren't right. Claw marks on the tree trunks, too high up to be from any animal I knew. Patches of ground where nothing would grow, perfect circles of dead earth scattered through the forest like footprints of something huge and poisonous. And the cold was getting worse. My breath was starting to fog, and frost was forming on the tree branches despite the fact that it was still October and shouldn't have been anywhere near freezing. Rex stopped again, this time at the mouth of a cave I'd never seen before. It was bigger than most, tall enough for a man to walk through without ducking, but it disappeared into darkness after just a few feet. The air coming out of it was even colder than the forest air, and it carried a smell I couldn't identify, something old and sour, like meat left too long in the sun. That's when I heard the screaming. It came from deep inside the cave, echoing off the stone walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. Not words, just pure terror and pain, rising and falling like a siren. The sound hit me like a physical blow, made my knees weak and my hands shake. Rex bolted, just turned and ran back toward the campsite, tail between his legs. I couldn't blame him. But the screaming, one of those voices sounded like a child. I pulled out my flashlight and checked the beam, still strong. The knife on my belt felt reassuring under my hand. I'd been in worse places before, dark tunnels in Korea where enemy soldiers waited with bayonets and grenades. At least here I was only dealing with one family in trouble, or so I told myself. "I'm coming," I shouted into the cave mouth. "Hold on." My voice echoed back at me, multiplied and distorted until it sounded like a dozen men shouting. But underneath the echoes, I could swear I heard something else. Children's laughter. I took a deep breath of that cold, sour air and stepped into the darkness. The cave was bigger inside than it looked from the entrance. My flashlight beam reached out maybe 20 feet before the darkness swallowed it. But I could tell the ceiling was high and the passage was wide. Water dripped somewhere ahead, a steady tick-tick-tick that echoed like a clock counting down to something. I'd been in a lot of caves over the years, but this one felt different. Older, somehow. The walls were smooth limestone, polished by centuries of underground water, but they were covered with marks that didn't look natural. Scratches and gouges that might have been made by claws or fingernails or something in between. "Patterson family," I called out. "Can you hear me?" My voice bounced back and forth between the walls, getting fainter each time until it faded to nothing. But in the silence that followed, I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving deeper into the cave, just beyond the reach of my light. "Wait!" I called, hurrying forward. "I'm a park ranger. I'm here to help." The footsteps stopped. I moved as quickly as I dared over the uneven cave floor, my light sweeping back and forth. The passage branched off in several directions, forming a maze of tunnels that could go on for miles. Without proper equipment and a team to back me up, I could get lost in here and never find my way out. But I could still hear breathing up ahead, ragged, frightened breathing that had to be coming from the Patterson family. I chose the largest passage and kept going, one hand on the cave wall to Hosum. Help me keep my balance. The temperature was dropping even more, cold enough now that I could see my breath in the flashlight beam. cold enough that my fingers were starting to go numb despite my gloves. That's when I found the first sign that something was very, very wrong. It was a pile of bones, stacked neatly against the cave wall like firewood. Not animal bones, they were too big, too long, and mixed in with them were pieces of cloth, rotted and stained but still recognizable as clothing. A child's sneaker, small enough to fit a 10-year-old. A woman's purse with the leather cracked and moldy. These weren't recent. Some of them looked like they'd been here for years, maybe decades. I was photographing the bone pile when I heard the voice behind me. "You shouldn't be here." I spun around, nearly dropping the camera. A man stood just at the edge of my light, tall and thin with clothes that looked like they'd been through hell. His face was pale as cave mushrooms, and his eyes were black. Not brown or dark blue, completely black, like holes cut in his skull. "Mr. Patterson?" I asked, though every instinct told me this wasn't right. He smiled, and his teeth were too sharp. "You need to leave. Now. I'm here to help. Where's your family? Where are your children?" His smile got wider. "Safe. They're safe now." "I need to see them. I need to make sure they're okay." "No," he said, and his voice echoed strangely, like it was coming from more than one throat. "You need to go back the way you came. Forget you ever found this place." I reached for my radio, more out of habit than hope. The static was worse now, filled with voices speaking in that strange language I couldn't understand. But through the noise, I caught a few words in English. "Help! Trapped! Can't get out!" It was a child's voice, thin and desperate. "That's your daughter, isn't it?" I said to the man with black eyes. "She's in trouble." His smile disappeared. "She's fine. They're all fine." "Then let me talk to her." For a long moment we stared at each other in the pool of flashlight. I could see my breath fogging in the cold air, but his breath didn't fog at all. And now that I looked closer, I couldn't see him breathing at all. "You have Cherokee blood," he said suddenly. "I can smell it on you." "My great-grandfather was Cherokee. What does that have to do with anything?" "Everything," he said, and stepped back into the darkness. "They've been waiting for you, Frank Mountaineer." The way he said my name made my skin crawl. I'd never told him who I was. "Who's been waiting for me?" But he was gone, vanished into the black like he'd never been there at all. I swept my flashlight beam back and forth, but the passage was empty except for the pile of bones and the sound of dripping water. Then I heard the children singing again. It was coming from deeper in the cave, that same lullaby I'd heard at the campsite. But now I could make out some of the words, and they weren't in English or Cherokee. They were older than that, from a language that might have been spoken before any Europeans ever set foot on this continent. I followed the singing deeper into the mountain. The passage opened up into a huge chamber, big enough to hold a church. My flashlight beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls, but it could illuminate what was in the center of the chamber, and what I saw there made me wish I'd listened to Rex and turned back at the cave mouth. 4 people sat in a circle around a pile of stones arranged just like the ones at the campsite. The Patterson family, but not the way they should have been. They sat perfectly still, perfectly straight, their hands folded in their laps like they were posing for a photograph. Their eyes were closed, but their mouths were moving, singing that wordless lullaby in perfect harmony, and they were covered in ice. Not frozen solid, but coated in a thin layer of frost that sparkled in my flashlight beam. And their breath didn't fog. They didn't shiver. They just sat there singing while ice crystals formed on their eyelashes and in their hair. "Hey!" I called out, running toward them. "Hey, wake up!" They didn't respond, didn't even open their eyes. But the singing got louder. I reached the closest one, the father, and put my hand on his shoulder. His skin was cold as river stones, but he wasn't frozen. He was just wrong. Like something had gotten inside him and was wearing him like a coat. "Can you hear me?" I asked, shaking him gently. "Mr. Patterson?" His eyes snapped open. They were black, just like the thing that had looked like him in the passage. But behind the blackness, I could see something else. Fear. Desperate, terrified awareness. like he was trapped inside his own body and couldn't get out. His mouth kept moving with the singing, but his eyes were screaming. One by one, the others opened their eyes. The mother, the teenage son, the little girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. All of them with those black eyes, all of them still singing, all of them silently screaming for help. That's when I understood what Joseph Crowfeather had been trying to tell me. Something lived in this mountain. Something old and hungry and patient. And it collected people the way some folks collect stamps or coins, keeping them alive just enough to use their voices for its endless, wordless song. I was reaching for my knife when the children appeared. Not the Patterson children. Other children. Dozens of them stepping out of the shadows at the edges of the chamber. Some wore clothes I recognized from the last few decades. Others wore buckskins and beaded dresses that had to be centuries old. All of them had black eyes and frost in their hair, and all of them were singing. Cherokee children, white children, children whose families had come to this mountain over the years and never left. And in the center of them all, standing beside the pile of stones, was a little Cherokee girl who couldn't have been more than 7 years old. She wore a deerskin, dress decorated with small shells, and her long black hair was braided with feathers. She was the only one not singing. Instead, she was looking right at me. "You came," she said, and her voice was clear and young and absolutely terrifying. "We've been calling you for so long." "My name is Little Bear," the Cherokee girl said, stepping closer. The other children kept singing, their voices rising and falling like wind through the trees. "I died in this cave 200 years ago. I tried to back away, but my legs wouldn't obey me. The temperature had dropped so low that frost was forming on my jacket, and my flashlight beam was getting dimmer by the second. "You're not dead," I managed to say. "You're right here talking to me." She smiled sadly. "Death isn't the end, Frank Mountaineer. Sometimes it's just the beginning of waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone to listen, for someone to remember, for someone with Cherokee blood to come home." The Patterson family kept singing their awful song, but I could see the terror in their eyes getting stronger. Whatever was controlling them was feeding on their fear, growing stronger with each note. "Let them go," I said. "They're not part of whatever happened to you." "They are now," Little Bear said. "Just like all the others. We need voices to tell our story, and the living have the strongest voices of all." She gestured to the other children, and I saw the truth of it in their faces. Some of them still looked human, recent additions to this underground choir. Others had been here so long they were more spirit than flesh, translucent as morning mist. But all of them were trapped, forced to sing for something they probably didn't even understand. "What story?" I asked. "What happened here?" Little Bear's expression darkened. "Men came to our village in the winter of 1782. White men with guns and hatred in their hearts. I said we were helping the British, that we were dangerous, but we were just families trying to survive." As she spoke, the cave walls began to shimmer and change. Images appeared in the stone like reflections in dark water. Cherokee families huddled around fires, children playing in the snow, warriors returning from hunting with deer slung over their shoulders. "They came at dawn," Little Bear continued, and the images shifted to show armed men creeping through the forest. "We ran to the caves to hide, 47 families with their children. We thought the stone would protect us." The images showed people fleeing through the forest, carrying babies and helping the elderly. They disappeared into cave mouths all through the mountainside, hoping to wait out the danger. "But they followed us," Little Bear said, and now her voice was filled with an anger that made the air itself vibrate. "They brought dogs to track us. They found every cave, every hiding place. And then—" The images showed the awful truth. White settlers rolling boulders to block the cave entrances, trapping the Cherokee families inside. Some tried to fight their way out, but there were too many guns, too much hate. Others went deeper into the caves, hoping to find another way out. "We starved in the dark," Little Bear whispered. The children cried until they couldn't cry anymore. The old ones died first, then the sick, then the strong. I was one of the last. I found my voice again. I'm sorry. That should never have happened. But it did happen. And when we died, our spirits stayed here because no one remembered us. No one told our story. We became just another old legend, another ghost tale to scare children around campfires. The Patterson family's singing was getting louder, more desperate. Ice was forming on their skin faster now, and I could see their lips starting to turn blue. So you tak, others, make them part of your story? We need voices, Little Bear said simply. The dead can whisper, but only the living can truly speak. We've been trying to tell the world what happened for 200 years. There has to be another way, I said. You don't have to hurt innocent people. Like they hurt us? Little Bear's eyes flashed with fury, and for a moment she looked less like a child and more like something carved from winter wind. We were innocent too. We were children too. But no one cared then, and no one cares now. She was right, and I knew it. The Cherokee Massacre had never made it into any history books I'd seen. Most people didn't even know it had happened. The dead here had been forgotten by everyone except the mountain itself. But looking at the Patterson family, seeing the fear in their eyes as something else controlled their bodies, I knew this wasn't the answer. I'll tell your story, I said. I'll make sure people know what happened here. But let them go first. Little Bear studied me for a long moment. Around us, the other children kept singing, their voices creating harmonies that seemed to come from the stone itself. You have Cherokee blood, she said finally. But you also have the blood of those who killed us. How do I know you won't just walk away and forget, like all the others? Because I give you my word. Words are easy to break. Then what do you want from me? She smiled, and for the first time it wasn't sad or angry. It was hopeful. Stay with us, she said. Take their place. Help us sing our story until someone hears it. I looked at the Patterson family, at the ice covering their skin and the terror in their trapped eyes. The little girl couldn't be much older than Little Bear had been when she died in this cave 2 centuries ago. If I stay, they go free? All of them. They'll wake up outside with no memory of this place, no memory of the cold or the singing. They'll just be a family who got lost camping and was found safe. And me? You'll join our song. Your voice will help us tell the world what happened in 1782. And when enough people know, when enough people remember and mourn for the Cherokee children who died in these caves, then we can finally rest. I thought about my life above ground, my job, my cabin, my bloodhound Rex who was probably still running scared through the forest. I thought about all the missing persons cases that would never be solved, all the hikers who would need rescuing. Then I looked at Little Bear, at this 7-year-old girl who had been waiting 200 years for someone to care about her story. I looked at the other Cherokee children, some not much older than she was, trapped between life and death because no one remembered their names. And I thought about my great-grandfather, who used to tell me that some debts can only be paid with sacrifice. Okay, I said, but I want to do this right. I want to know all your names, all your stories. If I'm going to help you tell the world what happened, I need to know everything. Little Bear's smile got brighter, and the frost in her hair sparkled like stars. Thank you, Frank Mountaineer. Thank you for listening. The singing stopped all at once, and in the sudden silence I could hear the Patterson family taking their first real breaths. The ice began to melt off their skin, and color returned to their faces. One by one they slumped forward as whatever had been controlling them let go. They would sleep now, Little Bear explained. When they woke up, they'd be outside the cave with no memory of what had happened. Just a family camping trip that went a little longer than planned. As for me, well, I was about to become part of something much older than the National Park Service. Little Bear took my hand, and her small fingers were warm despite everything. Around us, the other children began a new song. Not the wordless lament they'd been singing, but something that sounded like a celebration. "Welcome home," she said. And somewhere deep in the mountain, I began to understand what that really meant. When I woke up, I was lying on the forest floor outside the cave, and the sun was shining through the fog for the first time in days. Rex was licking my face, whimpering with relief. My radio was crackling with voices. A search team looking for both me and the Patterson family. But something was different. Wrong, maybe, but not the same kind of wrong I'd felt before. I could hear them. Not with my ears exactly, but somewhere deeper. Little Bear and all the other children, their voices like whispers in the back of my mind. They weren't controlling me the way they'd controlled the Pattersons. This was gentler, like having roommates who spoke very quietly. The Patterson family was found safe 3 days later, camped by a stream about 5 miles away. They claimed they'd gotten turned around in the fog and lost track of time, but had never been in any real danger. The story they told matched exactly what Little Bear had promised. No memory of caves or ice or children singing in the dark. I told my supervisors I'd found them wandering and helped them find their way back to safety. Standard search and rescue. Nothing unusual. I left out the part about Cherokee spirits and 200-year-old massacres. Some things, I was learning, were too important for official reports. But I didn't leave them out of everything. Over the next few months, I started researching. I spent my days off in libraries and historical societies, tracking down old documents and land records. I interviewed Cherokee elders, including Joseph Crowfeather, who wasn't at all surprised when I came to him speaking words in Cherokee that I'd never learned. "The mountain taught you," he said simply. "Some knowledge comes through blood." I learned their names, all of them. Little Bear's real name was Atzilla, and she had been the daughter of a medicine man. There was Sequoia, who had been learning to be a hunter when the soldiers came. Ayana, who loved to weave baskets. Dozens of others, each with their own story, their own dreams cut short by fear and hatred. I wrote it all down. Every name, every story I could piece together. And slowly, carefully, I began to share what I'd learned. It started small, a presentation to the local historical society, an article in the regional newspaper. But the story spread. Cherokee communities that had never heard of the Devil's Backbone Massacre began to pay attention. Historians started asking questions about other lost Cherokee settlements. Within a year, there was a memorial planned for the site. Nothing fancy, just a simple marker explaining what had happened and listing the names of the known victims. The Cherokee Nation sent representatives to the dedication ceremony, and for the first time in 2 centuries, prayers were said over the place where Little Bear and her people had died. I was standing beside the memorial stone when I felt them leave. It was like a weight lifting off my shoulders, a sound I'd gotten used to suddenly going quiet. The voices in the back of my mind grew fainter, more distant, until they were just echoes of echoes. But before they faded completely, I heard Little Bear's voice one last time. "Thank you, Frank. Thank you for helping us go home." That was 3 years ago. I'm still a ranger, still patrol these mountains, though I have help now. Bill Morrison and Jack River, 2 good men who don't ask too many questions when I tell them to avoid certain trails during certain times of year. The caves are still there, of course. I go back sometimes, especially when other hikers go missing in that area. But they're just caves now. Limestone and darkness and the occasional bat colony. No ice where ice shouldn't be, no children's voices echoing through stone chambers. The Cherokee Memorial gets visitors these days, school groups, historians, Cherokee families who drive up from North Carolina to honor their ancestors. Sometimes I give talks about the massacre, about the importance of remembering history that isn't written in textbooks. I always end the talks the same way. These mountains hold memory in their bones. Every stone, every tree, every stream knows the stories of the people who lived and died here. Our job isn't just to preserve the wilderness, it's to preserve the truth. Some folks think I'm just being poetic. Others look at me like they can tell I know more than I'm saying. And sometimes, especially around October when the fog gets thick and the temperature drops, visitors to Devil's Backbone Ridge report hearing children's voices carried on the wind. When that happens, I just smile and tell them the mountain has a long memory. Because it does. And now, finally, so do we. The Cherokee children of Devil's Backbone Ridge are at peace, their story told, and their names remembered. But there are other places in these mountains, other forgotten tragedies that still echo through the stone and soil. Sometimes, late at night when I'm out on patrol, I can hear them calling, and sometimes when the need is great enough, I answer. My name is Franklin Mountaineer. I'm a park ranger, a keeper of stories, and a bridge between the world of the living and the voices of the dead. These mountains made me what I am, and I wouldn't have it any other way. My name is Marcus Whitethorn, but everyone calls me Mark. I've been a park ranger in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest for 19 years now. My mom was Cherokee from the Eastern Band, and my dad was Scottish. Growing up, I learned to track animals from my Cherokee grandfather. He taught me the old ways, how to read signs in the forest that most people miss. I'm 44 years old, tall and lean from all those years walking mountain trails. I keep my black hair long, sometimes braided like my grandfather did. People say I move through the woods like a ghost. Maybe that comes from the Cherokee blood, or maybe it's just practice. The day everything changed was November 23, 1981. It was unusually warm for late November, which bothered me. The mountains have their own rhythm, and when that gets messed up, something's wrong. I was sitting in my office when the call came in. "Mark, we got a problem," said Sheriff Williams from Danbury. 5 hunters from Charlotte went missing. Been 2 days since anyone heard from them. The missing group was led by Robert Hendricks, a guy who ran hunting trips for city folks. Good hunter, knew the mountains well. The kind of man who doesn't just disappear. They'd been camping near Moore's Wall at Hanging Rock, a 200-foot cliff that looks out over the Dan River Valley. My grandfather used to tell stories about that place. The Cherokee called it Nvi Azgaya Ayaliski, place of the hungry spirit. He said it was where warriors went for purification ceremonies to cleanse themselves of bad thoughts. But there were darker stories, too. Stories about something called Kekla Kudla, a hungry spirit that got inside people and made them do terrible things. I never believed those old tales. 19 years protecting these mountains, and I'd seen bears, wildcats, even the occasional crazy person. But monsters? That was just grandfather's way of teaching lessons about respect and balance. The next morning, I headed out with my team. Deputy Ranger Lisa Blackbear, she's Cherokee too, from my mom's clan, and David Murphy, a young guy fresh from ranger school. We drove as far as we could, then hiked the last 3 miles to where the hunters had set up camp. The forest felt wrong as soon as we started walking, too quiet. It was peak hunting season, but I didn't see a single deer track. No squirrels chattering in the trees. Even the birds seemed to have left. In 19 years, I'd never seen the woods so empty. "You notice how cold it got?" Lisa asked, pulling her jacket tighter. She was right. The temperature had dropped at least 15 degrees since we'd left the truck. Our breath made little clouds in the air, but back at the parking area, it had been warm enough for just a shirt. We found their camp in a clearing below the cliff, but it wasn't abandoned. It was destroyed. Tents were ripped apart, not by claws or teeth, but by hands. Human hands. Camping gear was scattered everywhere, but in a pattern that made my skin crawl. It looked like an offering, like the old Cherokee ceremonies my grandfather described. "Jesus," David whispered. "What happened here?" Near the fire pit, we found something that made my stomach turn. 3 deer carcasses, partially butchered. But they weren't cut up for food. They were arranged in a circle, heads pointing inward, like the sacred arrangements Cherokee hunters made to honor the spirits of animals they'd killed. But these weren't made by Cherokee hands. These were sloppy, wrong, like someone trying to copy something they'd seen but didn't understand. "Mark," Lisa called from the edge of camp. "You need to see this." She was kneeling by a big oak tree, looking at marks in the bark. Bite marks. Human teeth marks, but way too big. Like someone with the mouth twice the normal size had tried to eat the tree. I knelt down and looked at the tracks in the mud nearby. Human footprints, but wrong. They started out normal, size 11 boots, like you'd expect from hunters. But as they led away from camp, they got longer, stretched out, and at the toe end, there were scratches in the dirt like claw marks. "Radio's not working," David said, holding up his handset. Static filled with what sounded like singing. Old Cherokee death songs my grandfather used to hum. I tried my radio too, same thing, and my compass was spinning like crazy, unable to find north. "We need to get back to the truck," I said. "Call for backup." But as we started to leave, we heard it. A sound that made the hair on my neck stand up. Howling. But not from a wolf or coyote. This was human. Someone screaming in pain and hunger, echoing off the cliff walls above us. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. We should have left right then. Should have run back to the truck and called in the state police. But David was young and brave, and Lisa knew these mountains as well as I did. We all felt it. 5 men were missing, and if they were hurt, we were their only hope. "Could be one of them," David said, looking up toward the cliff. "Maybe injured." The howling came again, weaker this time, more human, like someone calling for help. I made the decision that still keeps me awake at night. We go up, but we stay together, no matter what. The trail up to Moore's Wall was steep and rocky. As we climbed, the temperature kept dropping. Our breath made bigger and bigger clouds. Frost started forming on the trees, even though it was still afternoon. Halfway up, Lisa stopped. "Mark, look at this." Someone had carved symbols into the bark of a pine tree. Cherokee symbols, but carved with fingernails, not a knife. The bark was torn and bloody. Under the tree, we found more tracks, the same stretched-out footprints, but now they looked more like animal paws than human feet. "How long would it take to carve these?" David asked. I touched the W's, mounds in the tree. The sap was still fresh, sticky. "Maybe an hour, less if you didn't care about hurting yourself." That's when I saw the fingernails. Human fingernails, embedded in the bark where someone had clawed the symbols. There was skin and blood on them. "Someone was in a real bad state," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Probably hypothermic, not thinking straight." But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The symbols were too precise, too deliberate, and they weren't random Cherokee marks. They were warnings, danger signs that meant hungry spirits hunt here. We kept climbing. The howling had stopped, but now we could hear something else. Singing. A man's voice, singing what sounded like a Cherokee hunting song, but the words were wrong, twisted. "That's not right," Lisa whispered. She knew the old songs, too. "He's singing about eating people." Near the top of the cliff, we found David Murphy. Not our David. The other David, one of the missing hunters. We'd gotten their names from the sheriff. David Carpenter, age 32, insurance salesman from Charlotte. He was sitting against a rock, facing the valley. At first we thought he was alive. His eyes were open, and he was still singing softly. But when we got closer, we saw the truth. Something had been eating him. Not all at once, but piece by piece. Chunks of meat carved away like someone was saving him for later. The worst part was his face. He looked peaceful, almost happy. "Oh God," our David said, and threw up in the bushes. I knelt down next to the body. The cuts were clean, made with a sharp knife, but around the edges there were bite marks. Human teeth marks that matched the ones on the tree back at camp. "Mark," Lisa called. She was looking at something in the dead man's hand. It was a note, written in shaky handwriting. "So hungry. Can't stop. The others taste so good. Find us Biffa. Or we find you." That's when we heard footsteps behind us. We turned around, and there was Robert Hendricks, the hunting guide. He looked terrible. Thin as a rail, skin gray like old meat, eyes yellow like a cat's. He was holding a bloody knife. "Hello there," he said in a voice that sounded like gravel. "You boys look tasty." David, our David, went for his gun. But Hendricks moved faster than any human should be able to. 1 second he was 20 feet away, the next he had our David by the throat. Now, Hendricks said, lifting David off the ground with one hand. "No need for weapons. We're all friends here." I could see David's feet kicking in the air. His face was turning purple. "Let him go," I said, pulling out my sidearm. Hendricks turned those yellow eyes on me. When he smiled, I saw his teeth had grown, sharp and pointed like a cat's fangs. "You're Cherokee," he said, sniffing the air. "I can smell it on you. Your blood will taste different. Special." He threw David aside like he weighed nothing. Our David hit a tree and didn't get up. "Run," I told Lisa. But she was already moving, pulling out her radio and sprinting toward the trail. Hendricks watched her go and laughed. "Let her run. Makes the hunt more fun." Then he looked at me with those horrible yellow eyes and licked his lips. "Your grandfather knew about us, didn't he? The old Cherokee man who taught you to track. He knew what lives in these mountains." My blood went cold. How could he know about grandfather? "That's impossible. You never met him." "Oh, but I did, back in 1952. He was hunting us then, too. Brave old man. Tasted like smoke and wisdom." The thing that looked like Robert Hendricks stepped closer. In the afternoon light, I could see his skin was wrong. Too pale, stretched too tight over bones that were the wrong shape. We've been waiting so long for another Cherokee hunter to come to the sacred place, waiting to see if the old magic still works. He moved toward me, and I shot him, 3 times in the chest. The bullets went right through him like he was made of fog. He laughed and kept coming. "Iron bullets won't work, boy. But you already knew that, didn't you? Deep down, in the Cherokee part of your soul, you know what I am." That's when the word came to me. The word grandfather whispered in the old stories, the word that made him shiver even on hot summer days. Wendigo. I ran like I'd never run before. Down the rocky trail, stumbling and sliding, trying to get away from the thing that used to be Robert Hendricks. Behind me, I could hear it laughing and following at an easy pace. It didn't need to hurry. Where could I go? I found Lisa at the bottom of the trail trying to get the radio to work. Static and Cherokee death songs were all that came through. "David's hurt bad," I panted. "And Hendricks? Lisa, he's not human anymore." She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. But then she heard the howling from up on the cliff. Multiple voices this time, singing hunting songs in that twisted wrong way. "How many of them are left?" she asked. "Started with 5. Found 1 dead. That leaves 4, including Hendricks. And they're all Wendigo." I said the word out loud for the first time. It felt like swallowing ice. Just like in grandfather's stories. Hunger spirits that get inside people and change them. Lisa went pale. She'd heard the same stories growing up. Cherokee children learned early about the spirits that lived in wild places and what happened to people who forgot how to be human. We made it back to the truck just as the sun was setting. David was conscious but hurt. Probably had a concussion and some broken ribs. We got him in the back seat and started driving toward town. "We need to call the state police," David mumbled. "Get a SWAT team up here." But I knew bullets wouldn't help. Grandfather's stories were clear about that. Wendigo weren't just monsters, they were people who'd been possessed by hunger spirits. Ancient things that lived in the mountains long before Cherokee or white men came here. "Lisa, we need to talk to someone who knows the old ways." She nodded. "Joseph Swimmer. He's a medicine man, lives near Cherokee. If anyone knows how to fight these things, it's him." But first we had to get out of the forest. The truck's headlights cut through darkness that seemed thicker than normal. Shadows moved between the trees, keeping pace with us. Every few minutes, we'd hear howling from different directions. They were following us. "Faster," Lisa said. I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, but the old Ranger truck could only do so much on winding mountain roads. In the rearview mirror, I saw shapes running between the trees. They moved wrong, too fast, on legs that bent in directions human legs shouldn't bend. 5 miles from the main road, one of them stepped into our headlights. It might have been a hunter once. Now it was 8 feet tall and thin as a stick. Its skin was gray-white like old bones, and its arms hung down past its knees. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of sharp teeth. I swerved around it and kept driving. In the mirror, I saw it watching us go, It didn't chase us. It just stood there in the road, smiling, with too many teeth. "They're letting us leave," I said. "Why would they do that?" Before I could answer, David spoke up from the back seat. His voice was different, hungry. "Because we'll come back. We have to. It's our job to protect people." Lisa and I looked at each other. Something was wrong with David's voice. It had that same gravelly sound Hendrix had. "David, how do you feel?" I asked. "Hungry," he said simply. "So hungry I could eat anything. Anyone." I pulled over and turned around. David's eyes were starting to turn yellow. The thing that used to be Robert Hendrix had touched him, and now the hunger spirit was getting inside him too. "We need to get him to Joseph Swimmer fast," Lisa said, "before it's too late." But even as we raced through the night, I could hear David in the back seat, humming Cherokee Huntin', G-songs with words that made my skin crawl, songs about the taste of human meat and the joy of the hunt. By the time we reached the main road, I knew we were running out of time. Not just for David, but for everyone. Because if the Wendigo were spreading, if the hunger spirits were finding new hosts, soon the whole mountain would be full of monsters. And we were the only ones who knew the truth. We drove through the night toward Cherokee while David sang his hungry songs and Lisa tried to remember everything her grandmother had told her about the old protections. I thought about my grandfather and wondered if he'd faced something like this before. The radio crackled to life suddenly. A voice came through speaking Cherokee. It was Joseph Swimmer. "Marcus Whitethorn," the old medicine man said, though we hadn't called him. "Your grandfather's spirit has been trying to reach me. He says the hungry ones have awakened, and only Cherokee blood can put them to sleep again." "How did you know to call us?" Lisa asked. "The spirits told me. They've been waiting for you to come back to the sacred place, waiting for you to finish what your grandfather started." In the back seat, David started laughing. It was a sound like breaking glass. "Too late," he whispered. "So hungry, so very hungry." When I looked in the rearview mirror, David's eyes were completely yellow now, and he was smiling with teeth that were too sharp and too many. Joseph Swimmer lived in a small house near the Cherokee Reservation. He was waiting for us on his porch when we arrived at dawn. He was ancient, maybe 80 years old, with white hair and long braids and skin like old leather, but his eyes were sharp and bright. "Bring the infected one inside," he said. "Quickly, before the sun gets too high." We carried David into the house. He wasn't fighting us, but he wasn't really David anymore either. He keyed, sniffing the air and licking his lips. "How long since the Wendigo touched him?" Joseph asked, examining David's eyes. "Maybe 6 hours," I said. The old medicine man shook his head. "Usually takes 3 days for full transformation. But these are old Wendigo, powerful ones. They work faster." He started pulling things from wooden boxes, sage, tobacco, something that looked like dried roots. The smell filled the room, sharp and clean. "Your grandfather came to me 50 years ago with the same problem. Wendigo had awakened in the sacred place, possessing hunters who took more than they needed. He went back to the mountain to put them to sleep." "What happened to him?" Joseph looked sad. "He never came back. But the Wendigo stopped appearing. We thought he'd succeeded." He lit the sage and started singing in Cherokee, waving the smoke around David. Our friend, or what used to be our friend, started writhing and making animal sounds. "The spirits are fighting inside him," Joseph explained. "Human spirit versus hunger spirit. We can tip the balance, but only if we act fast." "What do we need to do?" "Go back to the sacred place. Complete the ritual your grandfather started. Put the Wendigo to sleep forever." Lisa laughed bitterly. "Go back? There are 4 of those things up there, maybe more by now. They'll kill us." "Maybe," Joseph said. "But if you don't go back, they'll spread. Every person they touch becomes like them. In a month, every hunter in North Carolina could be infected." He pulled out an old leather bag and started filling it with herbs and roots. "Your grandfather's medicine bag. He left it with me before he went to the mountain." Said if another Cherokee hunter ever came looking for help, I should give it to them. The bag felt warm in my hands, like it was alive. What's in it? Protection, power, the ability to walk between the spirit world and this one. But it only works for Cherokee blood, and only if you truly believe in the old ways. David started laughing again, that horrible glass-breaking sound. You can't stop us, he said. But it wasn't David's voice. It was something else speaking through him. We've been hungry so long, and there are so many people in the world now. So much meat. Joseph sprinkled something over David that made him scream and curl into a ball. That will hold him for a few hours, the medicine man said. But then the transformation will be complete, and nothing will be able to change him back. He looked at me seriously. You have to go now. Today. Before it gets dark. How do we kill them? Lisa asked. You don't kill Wendigo, Joseph said. They're already dead. You put them to sleep. Send their spirits back to the hungry place where they belong. He handed me a small knife with symbols carved into the handle. Your grandfather's knife. Iron blade blessed by Cherokee medicine men going back 7 generations. It can cut the connection between the hunger spirit and the human body. What about regular weapons? Useless. Wendigo exist in both worlds, the physical and the spirit world. Only Cherokee magic can touch them in both places. As we prepared to leave, David called out to me. Mark, he said, and for a moment it sounded like our friend again. Don't let me become like them, please. Then his eyes went yellow again, and he started humming those horrible hunting songs. We drove back toward the mountains with grandfather's medicine bag and his knife. Lisa was quiet, thinking about what Joseph had told us. I was trying to remember everything grandfather had taught me about the spirit world and Cherokee magic. You really think we can do this? Lisa asked as we turned onto the forest road. I don't know, but we have to try. The forest looked different in daylight. Still too quiet, still too cold. But now I could see signs I'd missed before. Trees with bark stripped off. Animal bones arranged in patterns. Ravens and crows sitting in the branches, watching us, with 2 intelligent eyes. We parked at the same spot as yesterday and started hiking toward the sacred place. This time we weren't looking for missing hunters. We were walking into a trap, hoping Cherokee magic would be enough to save us. Halfway up the trail we found the rest of the hunting party. They were all there, the 3 we hadn't found yesterday. But they weren't human anymore. 8 feet tall, gray skin stretched over impossible bones, yellow eyes, and too many teeth. They stood in a circle around a pile of bones that might have been other hikers, other hunters who'd come looking for the missing party. In the center of the circle was the biggest Wendigo of all. Robert Hendricks, the hunting guide, now transformed into something that barely remembered being human. Welcome back, Cherokee boy, it said in a voice like grinding stone. We've been waiting for you. I pulled out grandfather's knife. The blade gleamed in the afternoon light, and the Wendigo stepped back. So you brought the old magic, Hendricks said. Good. This will be more fun. That's when I understood. They hadn't been trying to escape or hide. They'd been waiting for me to come back with the Cherokee weapons. They wanted to be hunted. The Wendigos circled us like wolves, but they didn't attack. They were playing with us, enjoying the fear. I could feel the medicine bag getting warm against my chest, and grandfather's knife seemed to hum in my hand. Lisa, I whispered, remember what Joseph said. They exist in both worlds. I need to enter the spirit world to fight them there. She nodded. What do I do? Keep them busy in this world. And if I don't come back, I handed her the knife. Use this on David. Don't let him become like them. I sat down cross-legged in the dirt, closed my eyes, and opened grandfather's medicine bag. The smell of sage and tobacco filled my nose. I started humming the old Cherokee protection songs, the ones grandfather taught me when I was little. The world changed. Suddenly I could see both layers of reality at the same time. The physical worlds, where Lisa faced 4 monsters, and the spirit world where everything looked different. The Wendigo weren't just gray creatures. They were human-shaped holes in reality, filled with endless hunger. Dark spirits that had been trapped in this sacred place for hundreds of years, waiting for people desperate enough to let them in. But I could also see the Cherokee spirits that protected this place. Animal spirits, bear, wolf, eagle, that had been trying to contain the hungry ones. They were losing the battle. The Wendigo were too strong, and there had been no Cherokee medicine man to help them for 50 years. Until now. I stood up in the spirit world, and Grandfather was there beside me. He looked the same as when I was a child. Long gray braids, kind eyes, traditional Cherokee clothes. "You came back," he said. "I knew you would." "Grandfather, I don't know how to do this. I'm just a park ranger." "You're Cherokee," he said simply. "That's enough." He showed me how to see the connections, threads of hunger and need that tied the Wendigo spirits to their human hosts. The threads were thick and dark, pulsing with evil energy. "Cut the threads," Grandfather said. "Send the hunger back where it belongs." I raised his knife, and it blazed with white light. The Wendigo in the spirit world screamed and rushed toward me, but the Cherokee animal spirits came too, bear and wolf and eagle, protecting me as I worked. I cut the first thread. One of the Wendigo stumbled and fell, the hunger spirit torn out of its stolen body. The human shape collapsed, and a thin, starved man lay in the dirt instead of a monster. Dead, but peaceful. I cut the second thread, then the third. But Robert Hendricks was the strongest. His thread was thick as a tree trunk, and when I touched it with the knife, it burned my hands. This Wendigo had been feeding for days, growing stronger with each person it consumed. "You can't stop me, boy," it said in both worlds at once. "I've tasted too much, grown too strong." That's when I understood what Grandfather had meant, what Joseph Swimmer had been trying to tell me. I couldn't just cut the thread. I had to take the hunger into myself. Become the container for the spirit, then sacrifice myself to send it back to the hungry place, just like Grandfather had done 50 years ago. I grabbed the dark thread with both hands. The hunger spirit poured into me like ice water. Suddenly I was starving, desperate, willing to do anything for just one bite of human flesh. I understood why the hunters had let it in. The hunger was so strong, so overwhelming. But I was Cherokee. I had been raised on stories of sacrifice and balance, and I had the animal spirits helping me. I pulled the hunger out of Hendricks and into myself, then used Grandfather's knife to cut my own connection to the physical world. The Wendigo screamed as the hunger spirit was torn away from it. Hendricks collapsed, just another dead hunter. In the spirit world, I was falling into darkness, the hunger consuming me from inside. But Grandfather caught me. "Not yet, grandson. Your time isn't finished." He took the hunger spirit from me and smiled sadly. "This is my burden, has been for 50 years. I've been holding it back, waiting for another Cherokee to come and take my place." "Grandfather, no." "Yes, it's time." He pushed me back toward the living world, and I opened my eyes. I was sitting in the dirt, holding Grandfather's knife. Around me, 4 dead hunters lay in the grass. Just men again, thin and starved, but finally at peace. Lisa was kneeling beside me, tears on her face. "You were gone for so long. I thought—" "It's over," I said. "The Wendigo are gone." We buried the hunters in the Cherokee way, with proper ceremonies for their spirits. Joseph Swimmer came up to the mountain with other tribal elders to bless the sacred place and make sure the hungry spirits stayed contained. David recovered. The Wendigo spirit left him when its host was destroyed. He doesn't remember much about being possessed, which is probably for the best. I kept Grandfather's medicine bag and his knife. Sometimes on quiet nights in the forest, I can feel other things stirring in the mountains. Old spirits, old hungers that remember when these hills were wild and dangerous. But I also feel Grandfather's presence, still protecting the sacred places, still standing guard against the things that want to turn humans into monsters. The Cherokee know that hunger without gratitude becomes evil, that taking more than you need awakens things better left sleeping, and that some stories aren't just stories, they're warnings about the parts of ourselves we have to keep locked away. I'm still a park ranger, still protect these mountains, but now I know there's more than bears and wildcats in the deep woods. There are older things, hungrier things, waiting for people who forget how to be human. And when they stir, when the hunger calls, there's still Cherokee magic to answer it. The mountains remember everything, and so do I. My name is William McLeod, but everyone calls me Bill. I've been a park ranger at Grandfather Mountain for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these North Carolina peaks could throw at me. I was wrong. It's funny how your whole world can change in just 3 days. Before this happened, I was the kind of guy who believed in facts, real things, things you could measure and write down in reports. My great-grandfather used to tell stories about mountain spirits back in Scotland, but I figured those were just old tales to scare kids. I should have listened to those stories. Grandfather Mountain rises 5,946 feet above the Blue Ridge, and she's beautiful in a way that makes your chest tight. The Cherokee called her Tanawa, the Great Hawk. My Scottish ancestors called her Ansianair Bayan, the Grandfather Mountain. I just called her home. September in the mountains is something special. The leaves turn every color you can imagine, and the air gets so crisp it almost hurts to breathe. Tourists come from all over to see it, but by mid-September, most of them head back to their warm houses in the cities. That's when the mountain belongs to us again. I was sitting in the ranger station that Tuesday morning, checking weather reports and sipping coffee that could strip paint. The radio crackled to life. "Bill, you there?" It was Susan Crawford, one of my younger rangers. Good kid, smart as a whip. "Yeah, what's up?" "Got a call from Duke University. They've lost contact with a research team up on Callaway Peak." I set my coffee down. Callaway Peak was the highest point on Grandfather Mountain, and it could be dangerous if you didn't know what you were doing. "How long?" 3 days. Last radio contact was Sunday morning. That made my stomach tighten. 3 days in these mountains could mean anything. Weather changes fast up here. 1 minute you're enjoying perfect fall sunshine. The next you're fighting for your life in a storm that came out of nowhere. "Who's the team leader?" "Dr. Margaret Sinclair. She's studying some rare plants that only grow at high altitude." I knew Dr. Sinclair. She'd been coming to the mountain for years, always respectful, always careful. If she was missing, something was seriously wrong. "Get Michael Highland and meet me at the base camp. We're heading up." I grabbed my gear and headed for the door, but something made me stop. On the wall hung an old photo of my great-grandfather taken right before he left Scotland in 1920. He was holding a walking stick carved with strange symbols, and his green eyes, the same eyes I saw in the mirror every morning, looked like they could see right through you. "The mountains remember everything," he used to tell me, "even when we forget." I shook my head. This wasn't the time for old stories. Real people were missing, and they needed real help. The drive up to base camp took 40 minutes on winding mountain roads. Susan was waiting for me with Michael Highland, a solid guy who'd been ranging for 8 years. His family came from Ireland, not Scotland like mine, but we both understood what it meant to have the mountains in your blood. "What do we know?" I asked as we loaded our packs. Susan pulled out a map. "Research station is here, about half a mile below the summit. They were studying some kind of rare rhododendron that doesn't grow anywhere else in the world." "Equipment?" "All high-tech stuff. GPS, satellite radio, weather monitoring gear. Nothing that should just stop working." We started up the trail. The first few miles were easy enough, well-marked paths through thick forest. But as we climbed higher, something felt off. The birds had gone quiet. In 15 years on this mountain, I'd never heard it so silent. "You guys notice anything strange?" I asked. Michael nodded. "Haven't seen a single animal since we started climbing. Not even squirrels. Susan stopped walking. Look at this. She was pointing at a tree beside the trail. The chadisatan. Bark was scored with deep scratches, like something with very large claws had marked its territory. Bear? Michael suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I knelt down and examined the marks. They were too deep, too precise. And there was something else. A smell in the air that I couldn't place. Sweet and rotten at the same time. Let's keep moving, I said. We've got a lot of ground to cover before dark. But as we climbed higher, that feeling of wrongness grew stronger. The trees seemed to lean in too close. The shadows fell in directions that didn't match the sun. And somewhere, just at the edge of hearing, I could swear I heard music. Bagpipe music. We reached the research station just as the sun was setting behind the peaks. The whole setup was there, 3 tents arranged in a perfect triangle, scientific equipment humming quietly, solar panels glinting in the last light. Everything looked normal except for one thing. Nobody was home. "Hello?" I called out. "Dr. Sinclair, anyone there?" The only answer was the wind through the trees. Susan walked over to the main tent and peered inside. All their personal stuff is still here. Sleeping bags, clothes, food, like they just stepped out for a minute. Michael was checking the equipment. "Bill, you need to see this." I walked over to where he stood beside a weather monitoring station. The digital readout was scrolling numbers that made no sense. "Temperature's showing -40, Michael said. "But I'm standing here in a t-shirt." I looked at the other instruments. Barometric pressure was jumping around like crazy. The humidity gauge kept switching between 0 and 100%, and the wind speed indicator was spinning so fast the numbers were just a blur. "Equipment malfunction," I said. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. Susan called from the edge of camp. "Guys, come look at this." We walked in, and over to where she stood beside what looked like a flower garden. But these weren't normal flowers. The plants were arranged in perfect circles and spirals, like someone had taken a lot of time to make patterns. "Dr. Sinclair's research notes mentioned collecting samples," Susan said. "But why would she arrange them like this?" I knelt down to get a closer look. The patterns reminded me of something, but I couldn't quite place it. Then it hit me. They looked like the symbols carved on my great-grandfather's walking stick. "We need to set up camp," I said. "First light, we start a proper search." We pitched our tents and got a fire going. The temperature had dropped fast once the sun went down and the wind was picking up. But it wasn't normal wind. It seemed to move in circles around our camp, and it carried sounds that didn't belong. Footsteps, voices speaking in a language I almost recognized. And that music again. Definitely bagpipes, but playing a tune that made my skin crawl. "You guys hear that?" Michael asked. Susan nodded. "Sounds like there's a party going on somewhere." I stood up and looked around. We were alone on the mountain. The nearest other people were miles away and thousands of feet below, but the sounds were getting closer. "Stay close to the fire," I said, "and keep your radios on." We tried calling base camp, but all we got was static. Weird static that sounded almost like voices. Michael fiddled with the frequency, but every channel was the same. Then Susan grabbed my arm. "Bill, look." She was pointing up the slope toward Callaway Peak. In the moonlight, I could see a figure standing near the summit. It looked like a person, but something was wrong with the size. Too tall, too wide. "Hello?" I shouted. "Are you Dr. Sinclair?" The figure didn't move, but as I watched, it seemed to grow larger, or maybe closer. It was hard to tell in the strange light. Michael pulled out his binoculars. He looked through them for a long moment, then slowly lowered them. His face had gone white. "What is it?" I asked. "That's not a person," he whispered. The figure raised what might have been an arm, and the sound of bagpipes filled the air. But now I could tell it wasn't coming from the figure. It was coming from everywhere at once. The trees, the rocks, the ground itself. And I knew the tune. My great-grandfather used to hum it when he thought no one was listening. It was called The Lament of the Mountains. Susan was backing toward the tents. "We should go. Now." But as she turned, she stumbled over something. In the firelight, I could see footprints in the soft earth around our camp. Human footprints, but huge, at least 18 inches long. "Those weren't there when we set up camp," Michael said. The bagpipe music was getting louder, and other sounds were joining it. Drums, voices singing in what I now recognized as Gaelic, the old Scottish language my great-grandfather had tried to teach me when I was young. The figure on the peak was definitely moving now, coming down toward us. And it wasn't alone. I could see other shapes moving through the trees, circling our camp like wolves. "Pack up," I said, fast. But as we started breaking camp, Michael disappeared. One second he was rolling up his sleeping bag, the next he was gone. Just gone. His gear was still there, but Michael was nowhere to be seen. "Michael!" Susan shouted. "Where are you?" His radio crackled to life in her hand. But the voice that came out wasn't Michael's. It was speaking Gaelic in an old man's voice. "Tha thu taigin da chaig," the radio said. "You have come home." I grabbed the radio. "Michael, if that's you, answer in English." More Gaelic. But now I could understand some of it. Words were coming back to me that I hadn't heard since I was 5 years old, sitting on my great-grandfather's knee. "The mountain remembers," the voice said, now in accented English. "The mountain calls its children home." Susan was shaking. "Well, we have to get out of here." But as we looked around, the shapes in the trees had gotten closer. Much closer. And they were huge, at least 8 feet tall, wrapped in what looked like gray mist. The largest one stepped into the firelight, and I saw what we were really dealing with. It looked like a man, but stretched out and wrong. Its face was hidden under a hood, but its eyes glowed green in the darkness. Green like mine. Green like my great-grandfather's. It raised one massive hand and pointed at me. "William McLeod," it said in a voice like wind through caves. "Son of the Highland, you know who I am." And suddenly, I did. The thing standing in our firelight wasn't human, but it had been once. I could see that now. Under the gray mist that wrapped around it like clothing, there was the shape of a man. A Highland warrior from the old country, carrying a sword that gleamed with its own light. "Amphir Liath Mor," I whispered. The words came from somewhere deep in my memory, from stories told in a language I'd forgotten I knew. The big gray man, the guardian of the mountains. "Aye," it said, and its voice carried the sound of wind and stone. "You remember the old words? Good." Susan grabbed my arm. "Bill, what is that thing?" "A story my great-grandfather told me," I said, "about the spirits that protect the Highland Mountains." The creature, Amphir Liath Mor, tilted its head like it was listening to something we couldn't hear. Then it spoke again. "Your friend, the young ranger. He serves the mountain now." "Where's Michael?" I demanded. It pointed up toward the peak. "He guards the sacred places, as is proper." More shapes moved in the trees around us. I could count at least a dozen now, all tall and wrong, all wrapped in mist. The air was thick with the smell of peat smoke and something else, something old and wild. "The botanist woman and her people," I said. "Dr. Sinclair, where are they?" Amphir Liath Mor made a sound that might have been laughter. "They came to take the sacred plants, the spirits that grow only here, in the high places. They did not ask permission." "What did you do to them?" "What was necessary." The creature gestured, and the mist around us thickened. When it cleared, we were no longer alone by our fire. 3 people stood at the edge of our camp, Dr. Sinclair and her research team. But something was wrong with them. Their skin had a greenish tint, like old copper. Their hair was tangled with leaves and small flowers. And when Dr. Sinclair spoke, her voice rustled like wind through branches. "We're part of the mountain now," she said. "Part of the garden. It's beautiful here, Bill. So peaceful." Susan stepped backward. "This isn't real. This can't be real." But Dr. Sinclair walked closer, and I could see tiny roots growing from her fingertips, reaching toward the earth. "The mountain needs guardians," she said. "People who understand the old ways, the connection between the land and the spirits." Amphir Leith Moore moved closer. "Your blood knows this place, MacLeod. Your ancestor made promises, gave his word to protect the sacred ground." Images flashed through my mind, not my memories, but older ones. My great-grandfather as a young man standing in a circle of stones somewhere high in the Scottish Highlands, making a deal with something vast and ancient, protection for his family in the New World in exchange for service in the mountains they would call home. "I don't understand," I said. "The covenant passes through the blood," Amphir Leith Moore said. "Your great-grandfather served the Highland spirits. Your grandfather served. Your father refused and died young for his betrayal. Now the duty falls to you." Susan was backing toward the tree line. "Bill, we have to go. Now." But when she reached the edge of our camp, she bounced off something invisible. The air shimmered like heat waves, and she fell backward onto the ground. "None leave until the covenant is fulfilled," the teacher said. I helped Susan to her feet. She was shaking, and I could feel her terror through her grip on my arm. But something else was happening to me. The longer I looked at Amphir Leith Moore, the more familiar it seemed. And I was starting to remember things. Not my memories. Older ones, Highland memories passed down through blood and bone, the smell of heather on summer hills, the weight of a claymore in my hands, the feel of mist on my face as I stood guard over sacred places where the spirits dwelt. "Fight it," Susan whispered. "Whatever it's doing to you, fight it." But it wasn't something being done to me. It was something being awakened, something that had always been there, waiting. Dr. Sinclair moved closer, her root fingers leaving trails in the earth. "It doesn't hurt, Bill. The transformation is gentle, and you get to stay in the most beautiful place on earth forever." I could see Michael now, standing at the edge of the firelight. He looked like the others, changed, but peaceful. His eyes met mine, and he smiled. "It's good here," he said in a voice like rustling leaves. "Better than anything below, Amphir Leith." Moore raised its sword, and the blade caught the firelight. "Choose now, son of the Highland. Take your place as guardian, or watch your friend die." It pointed the sword at Susan. "The covenant requires service. If not from you, then from another." Susan looked at me with desperate eyes. "Bill, don't let it take me." But I could feel the pull of the mountain now, stronger than gravity. Every Highland gene in my body was screaming that this was right. This was home. This was purpose. The creature stepped closer. "Your people made these mountains holy ground. Highland spirits dwell here, in the rare plants your scientist friends came to steal. They must be protected." I thought about Dr. Sinclair's research. Rare rhododendrons that grew nowhere else in the world. Plants with unique genetic markers that scientists couldn't explain. Plants that weren't really plants at all. "The spirits of your ancestors," Amphir Leith Moore continued, "took root here when they died. They became the sacred garden, and now others come to cut them up, study them, take them away to laboratories." The truth hit me like a physical blow. The research team hadn't just been collecting plant samples. They'd been harvesting the spirits of dead Highland settlers. And something that old and sacred wouldn't let that happen without a fight. "I understand," I said. "Bill, no," Susan whispered. But I was already walking toward Amphir Leith Moore, drawn by something stronger than fear. The creature reached out one massive hand. "Welcome home, Guardian." The moment Amphir Leith Moore's hand touched mine, everything changed. I was still standing by our campfire, but I could also see the mountain as it really was. Not just rock and trees, but a living thing. A sacred place where the spirits of my ancestors had taken root and grown into something beautiful and strange. Every rare plant on Grandfather Mountain glowed with its own light, the light of human souls that had chosen to stay and protect this place rather than move on to whatever comes after death. Now you see, Amphir Leathmore said. And I did. The Highland settlers who had died on these mountains over the past 3 centuries hadn't just been buried here. They had become part of the mountain itself, transforming into the unique ecosystem that scientists came to study. Dr. Sinclair's research team had been cutting up the spirits of the dead. But the connection went deeper than that. I could feel the memories of every Highland soul that had ever walked these peaks. Their hopes, their fears, their desperate love for this place that reminded them of home. And I could feel something else, the terrible loneliness of Amphir Leathmore. You were the first, I said, understanding flooding through me. The creature nodded. I came to these mountains in 1746, after Culloden, and after the English destroyed everything we were. Its voice carried centuries of pain. I was dying when I reached this peak, and something here offered me a choice. Die as a man, or live forever as a guardian. You chose to stay. I chose to protect what could be protected. And when others came, Highland families fleeing persecution, soldiers who had lost everything, I helped them make the same choice. To become part of something eternal. Susan was still pressed against the invisible barrier at the edge of our camp. Bill, please, don't let it take you. But I wasn't being taken. I was being offered something. A chance to belong to something larger than myself. To protect the spirits of my ancestors and ensure they would never be disturbed again. What about the research team? I asked. Amphir Leathmore gestured toward Dr. Sinclair and her colleagues who stood at the edge of the firelight with flowers growing in their hair. They violated sacred ground, but they can choose forgiveness if they serve. Dr. Sinclair stepped forward, her root fingers reaching toward me. It's not so bad, Bill. We're still ourselves, but we're also part of something bigger. We can feel every living thing on the mountain. I looked at Michael, who smiled with leaves rustling around his face. The mountain needs people who understand both the old ways and the new ways. You could set up protections. Make sure scientists respect what this place really is. It was tempting. More than tempting. Every Highland gene in my body was singing with the rightness of it. But then I looked at Susan, terrified and trapped, and remembered something my great-grandfather had taught me. The most important part of being Highland wasn't about dying for something. It was about living for something. There's another way, I said. Amphir Leathmore tilted its massive head. Speak. What if we could protest the sacred places without keeping people prisoner? What if we could teach scientists to respect what they're studying instead of just taking it? The covenant requires guardians. Then, let me be a guardian. But let me do it as a living man, not a spirit. Let me build bridges between your world and mine. The creature was quiet for a long moment. Around us, the other Highland spirits whispered in Gaelic, debating. I caught fragments, words about trust, about change, about the possibility that the old ways might need to evolve. And her? Amphir Leathmore pointed at Susan. She goes free, and she helps me. We establish proper protocols for research here. We make sure anyone who comes to study the mountain understands what they're really dealing with. Susan looked at me with hope and terror in her eyes. Amphir Leathmore raised its sword again, and for a moment I thought I'd chosen wrong. But instead of threatening us, it knelt and drove the blade into the earth. 1 year, it said. You have 1 year to prove this can work. If you fail, the covenant reverts to the old terms. I felt something shift inside me. Not transformation, but connection. I was still human, still alive, but now I could feel the mountain's heartbeat, could sense the spirits that dwelt here and understand their needs. Dr. Sinclair and her team stepped back into the mist, and I knew they would remain as they were, part of the garden, part of the protection. It wasn't cruel. Looking at their peaceful faces, I could see they were genuinely happy. Michael paused before following them. It's not so different from what we were already doing, he said. Protecting this place. Just bigger now. And then they were gone, melting back into the forest like morning fog. Amphir Leathmore pulled its sword from the ground. Remember, McLeod? 1 year. The creature began to fade, but its voice remained. The mountain will be watching. The invisible barrier around our camp dissolved, and Susan collapsed to her knees beside the fire. "Are you okay?" I asked, helping her up. She looked at me with wide eyes. "Your eyes," she whispered. "They're different." I touched my face. I felt the same, but I knew something fundamental had changed. I was still Bill McLeod, park ranger. But now I was also something more. "We need to get back to base camp," I said. "We have work to do." That was 6 months ago. The official report listed Dr. Sinclair's research team as relocated to extended field research in protected area. Michael Hyland was transferred to a special Highland cultural preservation program that didn't officially exist. Nobody questioned it too hard. The Park Service got what they wanted: continued scientific research with enhanced environmental protections. The Highland community got recognition for their cultural contributions to mountain conservation. And the mountain spirits got guardians who understood both worlds. But I know the truth. Every morning when I look in the mirror, my eyes are a little greener. Every season, I understand more of the Gaelic whispers that drift through the forest when the wind is right. And sometimes, when I'm alone on the high peaks, I can see them. Dr. Sinclair and her team, Michael, and dozens of others, tending their impossible garden of Highland spirits made manifest as rare mountain plants. Susan stayed on as my partner in the new Highland Cultural Heritage Site program. She doesn't talk much about what happened that night, but sometimes I catch her looking at me with an expression I can't read. She knows I'm changing, slowly but surely, into something between human and guardian. The research continues, but now it's different. Scientists come to study the unique ecosystem of Grandfather Mountain, but they come with respect, with understanding that they're dealing with something more than just unusual plants. And the mountain is healthier than it's ever been. The rare species are thriving. Wildlife has earned in abundance. The weather patterns have stabilized. Sometimes visitors report hearing bagpipe music echoing from the peaks at sunset. Sometimes they see figures in Highland dress, standing on the ridges, watching over their domain. I always tell them it's just the wind and the play of light on mist. But late at night, when I'm alone in the ranger station, I can feel Amphir Leith Moore waiting somewhere in the high places, watching, measuring my progress against the terms of our agreement. I have 6 months left to prove that the old ways and new ways can coexist. 6 months to show that guardianship doesn't require giving up humanity. Most days I think I'm succeeding. The Highland spirits seem satisfied with the protections we've put in place. No more unauthorized research, no more disturbance of the sacred places, no more cutting up of ancestral souls in the name of science. But some days, when the mist rolls thick across the peaks, and I can hear my name being called in voices speaking ancient Gaelic, I wonder if I'm just postponing the inevitable. The mountains remember everything, my great-grandfather used to say, even when we forget. And I'm beginning to understand that some promises, made long ago by desperate people in desperate times, echo through generations until they find someone willing to keep them. Whether that someone stays human in the process, well, that's still to be determined. If you ever visit Grandfather Mountain, pay attention to the signs about respecting the ecosystem. Follow the marked trails. Don't take anything that doesn't belong to you. And if you hear bagpipe music coming from the peaks at sunset, don't go looking for the source. Trust me on that one. The Highlands never forget those who honor their ancient ways, but they also never forgive those who don't. My name is William McLeod, and I am the guardian of Grandfather Mountain. Some days I'm still mostly human. Some days I'm not so sure. But I'm keeping my promise. One way or another, the mountain remembers. And now, so do I. My name is Rebecca Thornfield, but everyone calls me Becky. I've been a park ranger on Roan Mountain for 12 years now, patrolling the high balds that stretch along the Tennessee-North Carolina border. These aren't your typical mountains. They're covered in strange, treeless meadows that shouldn't exist at this height. Scientists can't explain why grass grows where forests should be. My grandmother used to say the mountain spirits kept them clear, but I never believed her old stories. I should have. It was early June 1985, and the rhododendrons were blooming like crazy. Pink and white flowers covered the mountainsides like snow. The weather had been weird all week, hot during the day, but the forecast kept warning about late spring snow at high elevations. Made no sense to me. I was checking equipment in the ranger station when the call came in. 6 women from East Tennessee State University had gone missing. A hiking group led by some professor named Dr. Sarah Moonbeam. Yeah, that was her real name after she changed it. They were doing research on women's history in Appalachia, camping near the rhododendron gardens. "When did you last hear from them?" I asked Sheriff Daniels over the radio. 48 hours ago. Their families are getting worried." 2 days wasn't unusual for backpackers, but something felt wrong. My stomach had that tight feeling I got before bad storms hit. I grabbed my gear and headed up the mountain with James Whitaker and Maria Santos, 2 other rangers. The drive up took an hour on winding roads that twisted through thick forests. The higher we climbed, the quieter everything became. No bird songs, no rustling in the bushes. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "Radio check," I called into my handset. Static answered back. "Mine's dead too," James said, shaking his radio. Maria frowned at her equipment. "All our batteries are fresh. This doesn't make sense." We parked at the trailhead and hiked toward the rhododendron gardens. The path wound through tunnels of green leaves and bright flowers. Normally, I loved this hike. Today it felt like walking through a tomb. The silence pressed against my ears. I kept my hand near my gun, though I couldn't say why. What was I going to shoot? The flowers? 20 minutes in, we found their campsite. "Jesus," James whispered. The tents were arranged in a perfect circle. Not the random scatter you'd expect from tired hikers, but a precise geometric pattern. Personal items, backpacks, cooking gear, clothes, formed smaller circles inside the larger one. It looked planned, deliberate. "Maybe they were doing some kind of research setup," Maria suggested, but her voice shook. I walked the perimeter, counting my steps. 12 feet across exactly. I'd seen circles like this before, in my grandmother's old books about mountain traditions. Books I'd thrown away years ago because I thought they were nonsense. Fresh herb bundles hung from tree branches around the campsite. Not the kind of plants you'd gather for cooking, but medicinal ones. Ginseng, bloodroot, wild ginger. Stuff that took special knowledge to find and harvest properly. The bundles were tied with grass, braided in complex patterns. "Look at this," Maria called from across the clearing. She stood beside a ring of stones I hadn't noticed before. 12 rocks, each about the size of a dinner plate, arranged in another perfect circle. The grass inside was greener than anywhere else, and tiny wildflowers bloomed in patterns that looked almost like writing. I knelt and touched the soil. It was warm. On a cool mountain morning, the earth inside this circle felt like it had been baking in summer sun. "We need to call for backup," I said, standing up fast. But our radio still gave us nothing but static, and my cell phone sobs. How'd no signal. We were on our own, just like my grandmother always said the mountain preferred. We searched in expanding circles around the campsite for 3 hours. No footprints leading. Away. No signs of struggle. No broken branches or disturbed undergrowth. 6 women had simply vanished like morning mist. But as we searched, things got stranger. The rhododendron flowers were opening in patches, creating patterns across the mountainside. From where I stood, I could see lines of bright blooms cutting through the forest like someone had drawn on the mountain with pink and white paint. "Plants don't bloom in straight lines," Maria muttered, following my gaze. Animals started gathering. Deer emerged from the forest and stood at the edge of our clearing, watching us with their big dark eyes. Squirrels chattered in the trees above, but they weren't making normal squirrel sounds. It was like they were talking to each other in a language I almost understood. James found the first real clue near a rhododendron tunnel, one of those natural passages created by the thick, twisted branches. "Hair," he said, holding up long strands caught on a branch. "Braided with herbs." The hair was blonde, brown, and gray, from different women, but it wasn't torn out. It had been cut and woven together carefully, tied with strips of bark into a complex pattern. "This is ritual behavior," I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. "Ritual how?" Maria asked. I couldn't explain the certainty that filled my chest. Somewhere in my mind, my grandmother's voice whispered about hair offerings and plant spirits and women who knew the old ways. We followed the tunnel deeper into the mountain. The rhododendron branches formed a natural ceiling 20 feet overhead, filtering the sunlight into green shadows. Our footsteps echoed strangely, like we were walking through a cathedral. That's when we heard the singing. Women's voices, harmonizing in a way that made my skin crawl and my heart race at the same time. The melody was beautiful and terrible, familiar and completely foreign, and it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the tunnel walls until I couldn't tell which direction it originated from. "Do you guys hear that?" James whispered. We all nodded, but none of us wanted to say it out loud. The singing sounded like it came from dozens of voices, maybe hundreds. Far too many to be just 6 missing hikers. Maria's equipment started acting crazy. Her compass spun in circles. Her GPS unit showed our location, jumping around the mountain like we were teleporting. When she took pictures, the camera produced strange images, energy fields that looked like heat waves, shapes moving in the shadows that we couldn't see with our naked eyes. My grandmother used to sing songs like that, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "What kind of songs?" James asked. "Healing songs, plant songs. The old mountain women used to gather and sing to help their gardens grow." But even as I said it, I knew this was different. Older, more powerful. The voices weren't just singing about plants. They were calling to something. Or someone. We emerged from the tunnel into a circular clearing I'd never seen before, even after 12 years patrolling these mountains. Ancient stone pillars stood around the edges, covered in moss and carved with symbols that hurt my eyes to look at directly. In the center grew a tree that shouldn't exist, massive and twisted, with bark like silver and leaves that shimmered with their own light. Hanging from its branches were hundreds of small bundles, herbs, flowers, stones, and other things I didn't want to identify. "This isn't on any of our maps," Maria breathed. James approached one of the stone pillars. As soon as he touched it, he jerked his hand back like he'd been burned. "It's warm," he said, "and it's vibrating." The singing grew louder. All around us, the forest began to change. Flowers bloomed at impossible speed. Vines crept along the ground toward our feet. The air itself seemed to thicken, becoming harder to breathe. And then we saw her. A woman stepped out from behind the silver tree, tall and pale, wearing clothes that looked like they'd been woven from spiderwebs and moonlight. Her hair floated around her head like she was underwater. When she smiled, I saw that her teeth were too sharp and too white. "Welcome, daughters," she said in a voice like wind through leaves. "We've been waiting for you." James tried to run. He made it 3 steps before his legs gave out, and he collapsed to the mossy ground. Maria raised her camera, but it crumbled to dust in her hands. I wanted to run too. Every instinct screamed at me to get away from this place, from this impossible woman, from the singing that now filled my skull like a living thing. But I couldn't move, because when I looked into her ancient eyes, I saw my grandmother's face looking back. The woman who looked like my grandmother but wasn't circled us slowly, her feet not quite touching the ground. "You carry the blood," she said to me. "Rebecca Thornfield, 7th daughter of the 7th daughter, though you've forgotten the counting." "My grandmother is dead," I managed to say. "Death is just another country, child, and the mountain remembers all its daughters." James groaned from where he lay on the ground. When Maria tried to help him up, her hands passed right through his body like he was made of smoke. "What did you do to him?" she demanded. "Showed him the truth. His dreams will be full of our sisters now. Every night, he'll see what was and what could be again." More women emerged from the forest. Some looked solid, wearing old-fashioned dresses and carrying baskets of herbs. Others flickered in and out of sight like reflections on water. They ranged in age from young girls to ancient crones, but they all had the same knowing look in their eyes. The Cherokee called this place Unica, the first woman continued. White Mountain, place of spirits. Your people called us witches and tried to burn us, but fire can't kill what never truly lived. Where are the hikers? I asked, trying to keep my ranger training front and center. 6 women from the university. Safe, learning, growing into what they were always meant to become. She gestured, and the air shimmered. Suddenly I could see them, Dr. Moonbeam and her students, sitting in a circle around the silver tree. Their eyes glowed with soft light, and flowers grew in their hair as I watched. They came seeking the old ways, the spirit woman said, searching for the truth about mountain women and our power. We showed them. You can't keep them here, I said. They have families, lives, jobs. They have a choice. The woman's smile turned sad. Stay and learn the healing arts that your people nearly destroyed, or return to their small lives and forget what they've seen. Maria stepped forward, shaking despite her fear. What about us? You're not blood, but you've walked our sacred places and heard our songs. The mountain has marked you. As she spoke, I noticed Maria's hands were changing. Her fingertips glowed faintly green, and when she touched a withered flower by her feet, it bloomed instantly into vibrant life. I don't understand, Maria whispered, staring at her hands. The gift doesn't care about bloodlines, only about an open heart and willing spirit. James stirred and sat up, but his eyes were different now. Distant and dreamy, like he was seeing things the rest of us couldn't. They're beautiful, he murmured. All the women who came before. They're still here, still teaching, still healing. James, snap out of it, I ordered. But he didn't seem to hear me. The spirit woman laughed, and the sound was like water running over stones. Your grandmother tried to save him once, too, you know. When he was a child and ate poison berries, she sang the sickness right out of his body. That's impossible. James grew up in Tennessee, not here. Distance means nothing to the mountain sisterhood. We go where we're needed. The memories hit me like a physical blow. Images that weren't my own flooded my mind. My grandmother as a young woman, traveling from house to house with her basket of medicines, delivering babies, setting bones, singing fever away. And yes, a little boy with dark hair, nearly dead from poisoning, brought back to life by her healing songs. She made me forget, James said dreamily. Made me forget so I could live a normal life. But the mountain remembers everything. More spirits materialized around us. Dozens of women from different time periods, Cherokee healers in traditional dress, European wise women in rough homespun, Appalachian grannies with weathered faces and gentle hands. They formed concentric circles around our clearing, singing in harmonies that made my bones vibrate. The summer solstice comes, the first spirit said. The longest day, when the boundary between worlds grows thin. Your friends must choose by then. Stay and become what they're meant to be, or return and lose the gift forever. How long do we have? I asked. 3 days. The silver tree began to glow brighter, and I saw that the missing hikers were changing. Their skin had a luminescent quality, and small flowers bloomed wherever they touched the ground. They looked happy, but also distant, like they were already half lost to our world. Why me? I asked. Why now? Because your grandmother's power passed to you when she died, whether you wanted it or not. The mountain balds exist because women like her maintained the balance between the human world and the spirit realm. Without that balance, both worlds die. I looked at the impossible flowering meadows stretching away in all directions, understanding for the first time why scientists couldn't explain them. They weren't natural. They were sacred spaces maintained by generations of women working together across time itself. I'm just a ranger, I protested. I know about trees and trails and wildlife management. I don't know anything about healing or magic or... You know more than you think. The spirit woman gestured, and suddenly I could feel every living thing on the mountain. the pulse of sap in the trees, the network of roots connecting the entire forest, the small heartbeats of insects and birds. Knowledge flowed through me. Which plants healed, which ailments, how to read the health of the land, how to sing the old songs that made things grow. It was terrifying and wonderful at the same time. "The choice is yours," she said. "Accept your inheritance and help us maintain the balance, or watch everything your grandmother worked for crumble into dust." The spirit of my grandmother stepped forward from among the circle of mountain women, and I nearly fell to my knees. She looked exactly as I remembered her, wild gray hair, bright blue eyes, hands stained with plant dyes and medicine. "Hello, little bird," she said, using her pet name for me. "You've grown up strong." "Grandma, you died 5 years ago. I was at your funeral. Death is just another way of serving the mountain." She smiled, and it was warm and real and heartbreaking. "I've been waiting for you to find your way back to the old knowledge. I threw away your books. I said they were superstition." "I know, and I understood. The world made you choose between old wisdom and new learning, but you don't have to choose anymore." She reached out and touched my forehead, and suddenly I remembered everything she'd tried to teach me as a child. The properties of every plant on the mountain, the songs that encouraged healing, the way to read the health of the land and the patterns of bird flight and flower bloom. "The university women came seeking our history," Grandma explained. "They wanted to write about the persecution we faced, how mountain healers were called witches and driven into hiding. But when they found us, they discovered something more." I looked toward the silver tree where Dr. Moonbeam and her students sat in their glowing circle. They were changing more rapidly now, becoming something between human and spirit. "They're dying," I realized with horror. "No," Grandma said gently. "They're being born, becoming what I should have helped you become years ago if I hadn't been too afraid of the world's judgment." Maria grabbed my arm. "Becky, we have to get them out of here." But James shook his head, still dreamy-eyed from whatever vision he was experiencing. "They don't want to leave. They've found something they've been searching for their whole lives." The spirit woman who'd first appeared to us, who I now understood was the essence of all the mountain's healers combined, raised her arms. The singing grew louder, and the silver tree blazed with light. "The solstice comes tonight," she announced. "The final choice must be made. Join the sisterhood completely and help maintain the balance between worlds, or return to your ordinary lives and forget what you've seen." "What happens if we refuse?" I asked. "The Balds will die. The healing knowledge will be lost forever, and the mountain will close its heart to human need." I thought about all the people my grandmother had helped over the years. Babies delivered safely, broken bones mended, fevers broken, grief eased. If this power disappeared, how many would suffer? But I also thought about my career, my life, my identity as a park ranger who believed in science and facts and rational explanations. "There has to be another way," I said. Grandma smiled. "There is, but it requires courage." She showed me, not with words, but with images flowing directly into my mind. A new kind of healing that combined ancient wisdom with modern knowledge. Plant medicine backed by scientific understanding. Healing gardens that looked natural but followed sacred patterns. A way to preserve the old traditions while helping them grow and change. "I can teach you," she said, "but you'll have to bridge two worlds, spirit and flesh, ancient and modern, magic and science. It won't be easy." Around us, the circle of mountain women watched and waited. I could feel their hope, their desperate need for someone to carry on their work in ways they couldn't. "What about them?" I pointed to Dr. Moonbeam's group. "Their choice is their own. But with you as a bridge, they could return to your world and still keep the gift. Become healers who work with both medicine and spirit." The silver tree pulsed with increasing light as midnight approached. The summer solstice was beginning, and I could feel the boundary between worlds thinning like fog in morning sun. "Choose now," the spirit woman said. "Accept your full inheritance and help us create a new tradition, or watch the old ways die forever." I looked at Maria, whose hands still glowed with healing light. At James, whose eyes held knowledge of plant medicine no textbook had ever taught. At the 6 university women, transformed but still recognizably human. I thought about my grandmother, who'd spent her life walking between 2 worlds, helping whoever needed healing regardless of their background or beliefs. I choose both, I said finally. Ancient and modern, science and spirit. But I want to do it my way. I walked to the silver tree and placed my hands on its bark. Power flowed through me like lightning, not painful, but overwhelming. I felt my connection to every growing thing on the mountain, understood the delicate web of relationships that kept the ecosystem balanced. I'll be the bridge, I told them all. But we do this together, as partners, not as spirits and mortals. The tree's light blazed brighter, and for a moment I thought I might dissolve into pure energy. But my grandmother's hands steadied me, and Maria's glowing touch anchored me to the physical world. "Welcome to the sisterhood," Grandma whispered. "Now let's get to work. 6 months lam." Later, I stood in the new traditional healing garden at Roan Mountain State Park, watching Dr. Sarah Moonbeam lead a group of medical students through the medicinal plant displays. She looked completely normal now, no glowing skin or flowers in her hair, but I could see the deep knowledge in her eyes. 4 of her original research group had chosen to return to the regular world, though they'd all changed careers. 2 became herbalists, 1 started a traditional midwifery practice, and 1 opened a clinic that combined conventional medicine with plant-based treatments. They remembered everything, but they'd learned to use their gifts quietly. The other 2 had stayed on the mountain as voluntary caretakers of the sacred groves, living simple lives that let them study the deeper mysteries. They were happy, and their families had eventually accepted their choice, especially when they saw the healing miracles their daughters could perform. James had become our specialist in traditional plant medicine, working with local Cherokee healers to document and preserve ancient knowledge. His wife said he was a different man, calmer, more connected to the natural world, and with an uncanny ability to diagnose plant diseases just by looking at them. Maria had transferred to our department and become my research partner. Her gift for encouraging plant growth had made her invaluable for restoration projects. Together, we were developing new conservation techniques that combined scientific method with traditional ecological wisdom. As for me, I was still learning to balance my 2 natures. My hands could diagnose illness in both plants and people through touch. My dreams were filled with guidance from the Mountain Sisterhood, showing me which herbs to gather for specific ailments. The Park Service had promoted me to head of the new Traditional Knowledge Integration Program, which had become a model for similar projects across Appalachia. The balds were healthier than ever, and visitors often commented on the unusual sense of peace they felt there. What they didn't know was at the mountain, women still gathered during the full moon, maintaining the ancient balance in ways that looked like natural phenomena. I'd learned to live with the responsibility. Every few weeks, I'd climb to the sacred grove for renewal ceremonies with Ivy Mae Buchanan, an elderly local woman who'd been carrying on the traditions in secret for decades. She'd become my teacher in ways my grandmother's spirit couldn't, showing me how to be fully human while holding supernatural gifts. The day I'm telling you about, a young ranger approached me as I finished my evening rounds. She had the look of someone wrestling with something she couldn't quite believe. "Becky, I found something weird up on Grassy Ridge, a circle of stones that isn't on any of our maps, and the plants around it. They're growing in patterns, almost like writing." I smiled, recognizing the signs. The mountain was calling to another daughter. "Show me," I said, shouldering my pack. As we hiked up the trail in the gathering dusk, I heard it again, women's voices harmonizing with the wind, welcoming another seeker to the sisterhood. The mountain never forgets its healers, and there's always room for one more woman willing to walk between 2 worlds. Some people say the Appalachian Mountains are haunted. They're right, but not the way they think. These hills are full of grandmothers' voices, carrying forward the healing wisdom that no persecution could ever truly destroy. The sisterhood of mountain healers spans all time, connecting grandmother to granddaughter across the years. On Roan Mountain, the ancient healing ways found their modern voice, and the work continues. Just listen to the wind through the rhododendrons sometime. You might hear us singing.